Yo, what is up guys, Delboy here, aka Blue Collar Sports TV. Hopefully you guys are doing well. If you're new here, smash that like, hit subscribe, all of that good stuff. So, Joe Smith Jr. knocks out Steve Geffrard in the 9th round to retain his WBO light heavyweight title. Of course, going into this fight, we knew that Steve Geffrard was a last minute opponent. Originally, of course, Joe Smith was supposed to fight Callum Johnson. Callum Johnson pulled out and Steve Geffrard was the last minute replacement. And, you know, going into this fight, I wasn't really expecting too much from Steve Geffrard, given that he was last minute and lowly ranked in the light heavyweight division. And quite frankly, this was a routine win for Joe Smith Jr. As the first bell went, Joe Smith Jr. started this fight very aggressively, as he tends to do. Joe Smith Jr., you rarely see this guy going backwards, and right from the opening bell, he closed the distance, and he started clubbing away at Steve Geffrard with his wide looping power punches. Early in this fight, Steve Geffrard was maintaining a pretty good defense, you know, just for basics, nice tight high guard, and he was able to block quite a few shots on the gloves. But the problem being, with that sort of high guard defense against a volume power puncher like Joe Smith Jr., even when you're blocking those shots on the gloves, on your arms, etc., it can still really take it out of you getting hit that much, and it can really drain your gas tank and your spirit. And we saw that going through this fight. Geffrard opened up with pretty solid defense behind that high guard, but he really wasn't doing anything to deter Joe Smith Jr. He was landing the odd check left hook counter here and there, a couple of nice straight right hands, etc., but he wasn't giving Joe Smith Jr. anything to really think about as Joe Smith was coming forwards. Therefore, Joe Smith maintained his work rate, and, you know, Joe was clubbing away to both body and head. And as this fight played out, you could see that Steve Geffrard was becoming more stationary. He was starting to get hit more as this fight progressed, and you could really see the spirit drain out of him round by round. I actually think Steve Geffrard did quite well to survive as long as he did, quite frankly. He did show a good chin, he showed good solid basic fundamentals, but ultimately he never really had the physicality, the power to really match Joe Smith Jr. And yeah, as this fight played out, Joe Smith was getting to him, and it was round 9 where Joe Smith kind of landed a barrage of punches, swarmed Steve Geffrard. Geffrard basically took a knee and he caught a left hook on the way down, and yeah, that's when Steve Geffrard's corner came in to throw in the towel, and rightly so, you know. Geffrard was coming in here last minute. He went some rounds, really he did all he could, and yeah, Joe Smith Jr. was way too much for him. In regards to Joe's performance, I would describe it as workmanlike. He got the job done, he basically won every round, and he got his man out of there, which is what you want to see from a puncher like Joe Smith Jr. One thing I do like from Joe's game in recent fights is that now when he's got a guy on the ropes or stationary and he's covering up, I like how Joe now varies the power of his combinations. He'll throw like light shot, light shot, light shot, light shot, and then like the 4th or 5th punch will be a really heavy power punch. I think he's now a more effective combination puncher than he was a few fights ago, and you know, that is partly down to how he's now varying his power punch by punch in those combinations. And that's something I've said previously about Joe Smith Jr. He's definitely putting his shots together better, and I like the power variety in those combinations. And also in this fight, when Joe used it, he showed a pretty good jab, forcing Steve Geffrard back. Joe does actually have quite a good jab as he's coming forwards, really steps into that jab. It's essentially a power shot in its own right. So yeah, I think Joe's definitely improved as a fighter in recent years. He's much more effective at applying pressure now than he was 3 or 4 years ago, in my opinion. And yeah, I mean, defends his title. What next? I mean, of course, I really want to see a unification fight. A rematch with Dmitry Bivol would be pretty cool. But honestly, I would much rather see Joe Smith Jr. versus Artur Beterbiev. I think stylistically, of course, that is a great fight. Both guys carry serious power. That's a tremendous fight, you know. Anthony Yarde is also highly ranked in the WBO. Frank Warren wants to get Anthony Yarde a shot, so maybe we could see Anthony Yarde versus Joe Smith Jr. And that is a good fight, don't get me wrong, but I would rather see a unification, quite frankly. But what about you guys? What did you make of Joe Smith's performance, and what do you want to see from him next? Share your thoughts below. Peace.